Objedinivši uvide Freuda i Wilhelma Reicha, dr. Aleksandar Lowen stvorio je tehniku bioenergetike za liječenje stresa, napetosti i trauma. Glavni temelj te tehnike jest ideja da je sve što se događa u umu zapisano u tijelu i odražava se na tijelu, ali vrijedi i obrnuto. Tijelo je spomenar u kojem su zapisani svi naši doživljaji, radosti, tuge, blokade, stresovi, traume. Stoga puka racionalna analiza problema nije dovoljna, već se treba nekako riješiti tih duboko ukorijenjenih tjelesnih zapisa. Zato se traumama u bioenergetici pristupa kroz tjelesnu i mišićnu aktivnost kojom se želi ukroniti blokade koje su prepreka prema psihičkom i fizičkom zdravlju. Kroz disanje, glasanje i mišićnu aktivnost želi se ponovno stvoriti sklad onog biološkog, anatomskog, neurološkog i emocionalnog u nama samima. Na istom tragu je i inovativna metoda T.R.E. Ta kratica označava vježbe kojima tijelo samo otpušta dublje mišićne obrasce stresa i to tako što aktivira prirodne refleksne mehanizme. Kroz aktiviranje podrhtavanja mišića otpuštaju se mišićne tenzije te se opušta i živčani sustav, čime se tijelo potiče da se vrati u svoj prvobitni sklad i ravnotežu. A sklad i ravnoteža oduvijek su nas zanimali ovdje, na rubu znanosti. Dobro večer. Heiner Steckel je bioenergetski terapeut koji obećava terapeute bioenergetskoj analizi, također i učitelj metode T.R.E. O svemu tome večeras će biti riječi, pa dobro večer.
Hello.
Krenemo od samog početka, da ne kažem prapočetka, i rastumačimo što točno to jest bioenergetika, s obzirom da je nije potrebno miješati sa nekim drugim pojmovima kao što su bioenergija. I na koji način nas to vodi u prošlost negdje do Wilhelma Reicha, s kojim je zapravo započela cijela ta škola razmišljanja?
Well, to start with, I think it's important to know that Wilhelm Reich was a pupil of Freud. So it really starts with psychoanalysis and Freud. Wilhelm Reich was a pupil of Freud, and after a while he integrated a deeper understanding of the body in already the psychoanalytic process, and he identified that many of the, what they call in psychology and psychoanalysis, the defenses, the way you protect yourself from memory, from feelings you cannot handle, actually represents in body tension, and that, for example, the breathing is inhibited. So Reich started to integrate in the classical psychoanalytic treatment awareness of body postures, of body habits, and then in his practical work he integrated working with the breathing to facilitate access to emotions and memories. Now Alexander Lowen, who himself was a pupil of Wilhelm Reich, and that's a history, the sequence, in the early 50s or the late 40s already, he met Reich, became a pupil of Reich, and then Reich we could consider the kind of the ground and the base for almost all kind of body-oriented psychotherapy.
You'd be shocked if I told you that this is what happens in only one state. Orgasm. That's what happens in orgasm. The whole thing floods down, the ego is reduced to the minimum, the whole lower end is fully charged and goes out. How many people have felt their heart
again, was a pupil of Wilhelm Reich, and he developed further the concept of Reich's way of working, still working with the same principles, including the body, understanding the body in the same sense.
That the body often tells you more about the person than he knows about himself. Well, that's not surprising, because we know, being therapists, that people block out their self-perception, they deny it, they repress feelings, they're not fully in touch with themselves. Nobody is in this culture.
But he further developed further, let's say, techniques and understanding to work with the body, and created the school of bioenergetic analysis, which is probably, I'm not a good historian, the oldest and most evolved school in body psychotherapy, and then from that school nowadays we have a lot of different schools, but many of them are going back to Alexander Lowen's work and through Alexander Lowen to Wilhelm Reich.
U biti je riječ o tome da je trauma na neki način zapisana u tijelu. Kada se kaže bioenergetska analiza, što to točno podrazumijeva? Na koji način se analiziraju te traume zapisane u tijelu?
Well, we analyze it, let's say, retrospectively by how a person needed and was using their own body to handle traumas. Now, when we talk about trauma, we are very different. Trauma is a big word, you know, so in bioenergetic analysis, we are mostly focusing on developmental traumas. So what we experienced in our childhood, in our whole developmental process from the baby time till, you know, 6, 7 years, 8 years of age and older. And in all these developmental stages, we are having emotional expressions which already involve the body. The baby is crying because it feels uncomfortable or needs something. I give you an example, and then, for example, there's a negative reaction or a non-resonant reaction to this crying, to this manifestation of an emotion, which is already a physical act. So it logically would need energy to express an emotion. It's an energetic process. And it would need energy to not express the emotion. So when you have a negative reaction to it, you would start to use, already the baby is using its own organism and body to no longer cry, to repress the emotional expression. And this will have consequences in tension patterns in the body. And they, interestingly, sad enough, but they stay, and they can stay for decades and longer. And then these tension patterns shape later our ways of experience the world and experience ourselves and be able to feel and express or inhibit the expression of emotions. So we look at the human being in this way as an energetic organism and see how this individual, for example, when I speak now of a patient, is using his own energy system, his body, in this way. So in a way we're looking for the patterns which are the consequences. Sometimes I tell my patients, you do all your life something like emotional bodybuilding. I mean, you go to a studio, do bodybuilding, but you can do bodybuilding by repressing emotions because you use certain muscles and muscle systems, for example, not to cry. This you can see later in the body. You cannot see exactly why this was suppressed, but you can see that the body was used in this sense. So this, just to give you an idea how we approach a human organism or a body.
Znači, stručnjak za bioenergetsku analizu je u stanju, nakon određenih godina iskustva, već po držanju čovjeka, njegovog lica, facijalnih mišića, može uočiti da postoje nekakve traume zapriječene, nekakve neizgovorene emocije, ili to dolazi na vidjelo tek kada se pacijent ili čovjek koji se izloži terapiji prepusti metodama o kojima će kasnije biti riječi?
We learn in our training is one essential part is what we call body reading. So we really read and we take the visual impression from the body, so what I can see, as one of the parts of our diagnosis. But that's not enough. So we talk and we see. Sometimes the body language, the way you move the body, the posture, the holding patterns, as we say, the structure of the body, because the structure is partly a genetic thing, there's no question, but then also it's a trained structure. So you have learned to use your body in a specific sense. And this you can learn to read, and again, you cannot deduct from that specific situations, but you could say, for example, you have a strong developed masseter muscle here, and you could guess that probably, with question marks, never say it's 100%, that probably this person needed and used this muscle a lot. Now for what? For example, As you see in children, when they are about to cry and they want to suppress the crying, you usually see this conflict already in these muscles. So then later you could say, what for did you use these muscles so that they become strong? That's what I call emotional bodybuilding. And probably you had to suppress crying or angry expression. It's all around here. I'm angry at you. I'm sad. And then we can have some guesses, and in the talking with the person and exploring past, exploring the history of specific emotions, we can then have an additional information about what had happened and how this person had handled traumatic situations. So you may not see the trauma itself, but you may see how the person had dealt with trauma.
Da, ljudi koji obično rade sa ljudima, bez obzira bili oni liječnici ili terapeuti, s vremenom razviju jednu, kako bih se rekao, perceptivnu sposobnost, pogotovo zato jer mnoge stvari dolaze u uzorcima. Pa s obzirom da nekakva takva davno potisnuta trauma može imati doista dugoročni učinak na cjelokupno držanje čovjeka, s obzirom da nije dovoljno široko poznata uloga fascije u našem tijelu i u kojoj mjeri zapravo je to okvir koji drži cijelo naše tijelo. Na neki način promjene i stezanja na određenom mjestu u tijelu prije određenog broja godina mogu u razvojnoj fazi utjecati na zapravo cjelokupni izražaj i držanje čovjeka. Pa kada on jednog dana to osvijesti, kako se počne oslobađati od te godinama sticane navike? Na koji način se tijelo potiče da, pretpostavljam prvo kroz glas, pa onda možda kroz pokret, da počne samo raditi na onome što zapravo i ne mora čovjek točno znati o čemu se radi, tijelo će znati. Ali kako ga se stimulira, kako će se nekom kojem je trauma osviještena, kako ga se potiče na automatsku tjelesnu aktivnost, da tako kažem.
You almost talk like as if you've experienced it intimately. So you're already talking about fascia, you know, and forms our body, and we only became really aware of the importance of this body structure, connective tissue, in the past years. And actually, we have a big assistant in this work, which is the basic vitality of the body. This sounds very simple. It is simple. It's more complex, sure. But when you stimulate in a human organism basic vital responses, so we can say the energy, you could say the excitation of the body by increasing breathing, for example, to provoke involuntary movements like tremoring, then this energy flow, so to speak, will have the tendency to find its way as a free flow through the organism. So the energy flow itself will show you where are the blocks, as we say, or the inhibitions, or the doors which are not that flexible any longer, the tension patterns. So the organism itself wants to be free and be vital, and by stimulating this, we already can get this organism into a certain conflict between the free flow and the necessity of some blockings, and the blockings are usually connected to old experiences and necessities to protect yourself. So then we can go in different ways. You know, we can explore with a person, for example, to increase a certain holding pattern. Let's say, for example, you see the holding pattern in my body that I pull my shoulders up. And if you look at me, you will probably have an idea that maybe I'm anxious or I'm afraid, you know, or even shocked, you know. Then if you would be my therapist, you could tell me, well, Mr. Steckel, why don't you increase this a little bit? Because this may be completely unconscious. It's my habit. Now you tell me, increase it a little bit, make it stronger. I feel what I do with my body, and maybe by making it stronger, I start to realize, wow, this has to do with some fear in me. Then so we make it stronger, and then you say, now how about relaxing? And then I said, oh, I relax it now. You see, and so there I go just into, already I go into this process of understanding, feeling how I used my body in a specific situation, plus that this specific situation is probably from my past, and I don't have any reason to be that afraid here because you're a friendly man talking with me, and this is just from my past, and if I relax, I can say, wow, this could be a possibility here. So I could relax, and I could start to breathe, and I feel better. It's oversimplified, but as a principle, it could be a working principle we are working with.
Kada je Aleksandar Lowen oblikovao te principe, to je bilo prije skoro pola stoljeća. U kojoj mjeri danas je bioenergetika raširena po svijetu? Kakav je njen status u Njemačkoj? Evo, u Hrvatskoj se tek počela pojavljivati zahvaljujući udruzi od Tempora, koja je, recimo, se bavi određenim dijelom bioenergetike o kojem će kasnije biti riječi. Ali u Njemačkoj je daleko duže prisutna. I kakav je uopće njen status i njena percepcija kod ljudi? Je li još uvijek nešto što začuđuje ili je postala uobičajena nekakva metoda?
No, sure, I will tell you it should be mainstream, but honestly speaking, it is not, unfortunately. It was actually stronger represented 25, 30 years ago, which is interesting in the whole period when we all wanted to get free of old structures, you know, cultural movement and all this. So then it was a little bit the high time of bioenergetics. Now, that it is not that well known at this moment, I think also has to do with, you have to understand the law restrictions of practicing psychotherapy. Germany and many countries now put strong restrictions in licensing, and there are certain methods are officially recognized. Bioenergetics is not belonging to that. But on the other hand, with all the new research now on the outcomes of neurobiology, neuroscience, and trauma understanding, it is a time where we cannot avoid the body any longer. There's nothing like body or mind or separated. We understand, and everybody, I would say, understands that it all works together, so there is more consciousness of this. Bioenergetic analysis as a method is not that recognized because it's not like paid by health insurance, so we are considered still marginal, but the knowledge of this field now is more and more asked, and for example, I get more and more invited, or colleagues, to present this, what we are doing, to other modalities, and they get interested, and so I think there's good hope with all this new science, which is proving a lot what Alexander Lowen, for example, half a century ago already found or talked about or practiced, a bit more by his intuition than by scientific proof. And now we have more and more facts that, that show that there's more explanation we could use from science for that.
Na mnogim područjima tijekom povijesti intuicija je nekako prethodila podacima. To je, rekao bih, dosta uobičajeni put kod svakog istraživanja nečeg nepoznatog. Sad kad smo rastumačili po prilici što bi to bila bioenergetika i bioenergetska analiza, možemo spomenuti i jednu, rekao bih, granu nje, jednu podvrstu možemo reći, koju je utemeljio čovjek imenom David Berceli i koja se zove T.R.E, odnosno kraticom na hrvatski T.R.E. Pa što je to T.R.E? Po čemu je ona dio bioenergetske analize, a što je u njoj novo i kako je nastala?
I wouldn't say it belongs to bioenergetic analysis, but it has one of its roots, ground foundations and roots in bioenergetic analysis, because David Berceli was trained in bioenergetic analysis, so he is also a bioenergetic therapist, besides other trainings he had. Now, T.R.E, and there's one big differentiation. Bioenergetic analysis is considered and is a body-oriented psychotherapy, so it's a therapeutic modality. T.R.E is a tool, a technique developed which can be used as a self-help technique. It can be used as a technique working with big groups. And it is a tool which can be very useful in a therapeutic context, if the person is trained to be a therapist, and as prevention tools, so it is not, T.R.E is not considered a therapy, a psychotherapy. So this is a big differentiation. T.R.E comes from tension and trauma releasing exercises. And so what David Berceli did when he was first a trauma consultant, traveling around the world. He had been in war regions. He was dealing with natural catastrophes. And so he was confronted with large populations who were shock traumatized, for example. And he found that the paradigm of individual therapy he could not use there. It's impossible, you know. You have 10,000 of people traumatized. So he was, and he was observing that, for example, in shock trauma, the human body, independently from cultural background and any education, reacts in the same way. And this observation is the same observation what we have in developmental trauma. And if you would allow me to stand up, I will show you how the human body does this. So if we would have one of these light balls explode here and there will be loud sound, my body would do something like this. If we have a bomb explosion, my body will do something like this. So it will contract in the front part of the body. And he was observing this in war situations, sitting in the bomb shelter. And they were sitting there having little children on their lap. And all of the people sitting on the wall with the children, the body did this. There was a second observation with this, that the smaller children started to tremor and to shake. And we all know this, you know, you can shake from fear, you know. And then the older the children get, let's say like till about 10 years, they were shaking. Then a little older, they were shaking, but they were already trying to suppress the shaking. So they were in conflict with the trembling. And then 18 years old and older, and the adults, they were not shaking. So he was just interested in this. Now the shaking mechanism and the trembling we already used in bioenergetic analysis because it's a natural way of the body to release tensions. Now then in this context of shock trauma, he just was interested in what's happening there. And he was starting to talk to the adult people sitting around. I mean, didn't you have an impulse to tremble or shake? And I said, yes, but I didn't want that the child feels insecure. And I don't want to show my insecurities, so usually as adults we suppress this. If I would be very, very nervous here in your show, you probably would see this, you see, and I will suppress it because I want you to believe what I say and not that I'm nervous and all the people looking at it, so I suppress it. How do I do it? By muscle tension.
Dobro, vratit ćemo se opet na detalje vezane uz I.T.R.E, ali nakon kratkog predaha. Naime, tehnika I.T.R.E i bioenergetika općenito na mnoge načine već prisutna u Hrvatskoj, a evo gdje i kako je gospodin Heiner Steckel uopće posjetio Hrvatsku.
Heiner Steckel je međunarodni edukator, odnosno psihoterapeut iz područja bioenergetike. Bioenergetika, dakle, nije bioenergija, to je jedan pristup liječenju trauma, napetosti i stresa koji je razvio dr. Alexander Lowen. Heiner Steckel je imao sreću i radio je s njim preko 10 godina. I on, dakle, je trenutno i predsjednik međunarodnog udruženja učitelja koji uče i u Europi i cijelim svijetom zapravo rade edukaciju za bioenergetske terapeute.
Velika nam je privilegija imati gospodina Steckela kao trenera našem terapeutskom timu u našem IPD centru, Integral Personal Development, gdje u biti ako radimo na osobnom razvoju pojedinca, neminovno se srećemo sa posljedicama rane traume i općenito traumatskih iskustava koji su jedan od češćih razloga problema zbog kojih ljudi dolaze u nekakav rad na sebi i nekakav program osobnog razvoja kao što je kod nas u centru. Rana trauma je u osnovi većine problematičnih stanja na koja se ljudi žale, tipa unutarnje nemira, anksioznosti, prema napadajima panike čak, osjećaja nevrijednosti, nemanja dovoljnog kontakta sa sobom, potrebe da budem bolji od drugih, dakle neke velike kompetitivnosti, perfekcionizma, problema sa spavanjem, problema sa probavom, eating, dakle problema sa jedenjem I u osnovi su to sve problematike koje u podlozi imaju rana iskustva koja su bila preplavljujuća za neurološki sustav. I kad govorimo o traumi, u stvari govorimo o tjelesnom stanju. Mi je doživljavamo i vidimo na van kao psihološko stanje ili unutarnje nepoželjno emocionalno stanje. Međutim, trauma koja je puno šira nego što znamo ili podrazumijevamo u društvu je nešto što prvenstveno pogađa tijelo i pogađa neurološki sustav. I ako želimo raditi na posljedicama traume ili ovim simptomima koje sam spomenuo, neophodno je raditi preko tijela, odnosno kroz razne koncepte tjelesno orijentiranih psihoterapija. Heiner Steckel baštini bioenergetsku analizu kao jednu od prvih tjelesno orijentiranih psihoterapija, TRE kao izvanrednu tehniku, nije terapija, ali izvanredna tehnika.
T.R.E je, znači Stress Trauma Release Exercises je nastala iz bioenergetike zapravo, ali nije terapija. Znači, T.R.E je, da kažemo, fiziologija. Znači, u psihoterapiji raznim tehnikama se rješavaju neki problemi, radi se na, ne znam, potisnutim materijalima i tako dalje. Kod T.R.E-a, i to je zapravo prekrasno kod te metode, koji je, treba samo napomenuti, utemeljio David Berceli, koji je također radio sa Aleksandrom Lowenom, ali on je onda to dalje razvio u tom pravcu, to je čista fiziologija. Što to znači? To znači da zapravo kod tih vježbi vi puštate tijelo da radi ono što ono želi. Znači, za razliku od drugih tehnika opuštanja, kao što su joga, ne znam, jogging, meditacija, šetnja obična, bilo što, to su sve fitness, to su sve djelatnosti gdje vi zapravo govorite tijelu što ono treba raditi. Odnosno, tijelo radi vrlo svjesne pokrete, akcije i tako dalje. Kod T.R.E-a je sasvim druga priča. Znači, upravo želimo isključiti svjesni dio i to se u T.R.E-u radi i pustiti tijelo jer tijelo najbolje zna, rekao bi Lowen. Njegova je inače teza, vi ste vaše tijelo. Znači, tijelo nije kuća duše u kojoj duša stanuje u prolazu na zemaljski svijet. Tijelo nije auto koji taksira od reinkarnacije do reinkarnacije, niti je tijelo stroj kojem gore, kako se kaže, programer programira šta on treba raditi. Vi ste vaše tijelo.
Pošto radim s tijelima ljudi i sama radim na svojem tijelu, odlučila sam da sve ono što radim nije dovoljno. Jedan moj prijatelj mi je predložio i dao mi je informacije o TRE vježbanju i pokazao jednu vježbu koja me se jako dojmila. Došlo je do kompletnog pobuđivanja cijelog tijela i opuštanja cijelog tijela. Znači da tijelo je radilo ono što je htjelo. Nije bilo vođeno umom, nego je bilo vođeno samim sobom. I dok god sam ja to njemu dopuštala da radi što želi, bilo je super. Čim sam uključila mozak, to je prestalo. I to me jako fasciniralo. Nešto što me još dojmilo, a to je energija koja se pobuđuje u tijelu. Toplina koja putuje tijelom. Tijelo reagira u valovima. Znači, kad na jednom mjestu krene, prijeđe na sljedeći dio i iza toga se ponovo vraća. I tako u kontinuitetu. Kada je tijelu dosta, ono jednostavno prestane vibrirati. Kratkoročni učinci TRE tehnike su bili u smislu da je tijelo bilo opušteno, relaksirano i imala sam osjećaj kao da je to jedna dobra masaža. Dugoročni učinci su se vidjeli tek kasnije, gdje je taj ponavljanjem vježbanja je bilo sve bolje i taj osjećaj ugode, opuštenosti je trajao sve duže i duže.
Heinera Steckela pozvala je udruga od Tempora Znači, mi smo prije 5 godina osnovali smo našu udrugu. Mi nismo neka profesionalna udruga, mi smo društvo ptica pjevica i radimo iz entuzijazma to što radimo. A osnovali smo se zato što smo primijetili da u Hrvatskoj nema ni jedne jedine knjige prevedene od Aleksandra Lowena. Znači, dr. Aleksander Lowen je učenik Wilhelma Reicha i on je zapravo jedno od najpoznatijih imena koji je kasnije razvio njegov rad dalje. I autor je 13 knjiga, od kojih su sve prevedene na tipa 40-50 svjetskih jezika, pa čak i na japanski i kineski. I tako da je Heiner zapravo 5., 6., 7. put u Hrvatskoj i ovaj put smo ga zvali da održi 2 radionice, znači jednu iz bioenergetike sa polaznicima centra od gospodina Kuljiša, a drugu da napravi uvodnu radionicu iz T.R.E. T.R.E. je znači Stress, Trauma and Tension Release Exercises. To je sad drugi projekt kojim se udruga bavi, jer je Heiner i certificirani trener za T.R.E.
Započeli smo pomalo analizirati i upoznavati tehniku T.R.E. koja je jedan od razloga vašeg dolaska u Hrvatsku. Prije ovog priloga, naravno, da se podsjetimo, David Berceli je uočio određene obrasce ponašanja, konkretno drhtanje, stezanje i sl. To je naravno nametnulo pitanje i koje je sadržavalo određeni odgovor da se tijelo na neke načine štiti od traume ili nešto tu radi ili možda stvara traumu zapravo. Kada je jednom ustanovio te obrasce ponašanja, znači stezanje, trešnju i sve ono što doživljavamo, to je svatko osjetio nakon što je skoro imao automobilsku nesreću, kada počne onaj posttraumatski sindrom i tako. Pravo pitanje je bilo što sada s tim? I na koji način je od tog uočavanja nastala tehnika o kojoj danas pričamo, koja se zove T.R.E., odnosno tehnika koja omogućava čovjeku da se sam na neki način si pomogne.
Well, I have to let us look for a moment into the animal world, because you will see this shaking mechanism, this vibration with animals when they and we belong to the same
family.
Thank you. And not everybody likes to hear this, but I like it. Because we have an animal nature, so we have something in common, at least with the mammals. And when you have an animal traumatized or in a threat situation, the same as us, we have a certain order of dealing with threat and trauma, which is, if there would be something happening which is a light concern or trauma, something happening here, or which we don't understand, we would look at each other and we said, do you hear this? What is this? So we would make social contact first. Now, if there's something happening which threatens us all the way, social contact is finished, we would just try to run away. So we have the flight impulse. If the door is closed and the beast is after us, or the robber or whoever, and we cannot run away, we will turn around and try to fight. So we have the fight, and if we realize this danger is too strong, and actually our organism does this for us, we don't even have to recognize it consciously, then we will play dead, like the animal. Or in the human language we will say we dissociate, so we give up, play dead. All these are physical, neurological, biochemical and anatomical processes. And now how does the animal, and this is normal for animals, it happens every day in the wild animal, in the jungle. So how does the animal come out of this? There is this wonderful example with the polar bear, which was chased by a helicopter because they want to anesthetize him, to examine. The polar bear is running, and then finally the flight response of the bear is interrupted by this anesthesia. And when he wakes up, slowly wakes up from the anesthesia, you will see the trembling movements and the shaking movements in the body and what the polar bear is actually doing, he continues to run in a lying position. So he discharges the energy, we could say the adrenaline, the high adrenaline, when he's running away or wants to fight. And then he had to dissociate, in this case biochemically induced. Coming out of this, the organism discharges this energy by shaking. He will reorient himself, he will deeply breathe, and he will go on with his life. And he will not have post-traumatic stress disorder. The human animal, unfortunately, let's say fortunately, has the same possibility biologically, and this is what we are stimulating. Unfortunately, we don't use it that much because, for example, it's considered weakness or something that you get out of control, and it's considered more pathological symptoms than helpful biological resources. So this is where the TRE exercises start to work. It's a simple series of, let's say, 5 preparatory exercises where they come from yoga, stretching, Tai Chi, from bioenergetic. It's a mixture. None of these exercises originally developed. It's a very intelligent series, which first starts to tire out a bit the holding musculature. Exactly these muscles where you say, I have to stick it out, I have to stand it, you know, I tense myself to be strong. Tire these muscles out a bit to then facilitate in the 2 last exercises, especially in the last one, the tremor mechanism to go through the body, the shaking. So we provoke this shaking mechanism, and by this then shaking mechanism, there is a kind of generalized deep relaxation in the body, which is then helpful from tension release up to trauma release. And what is important, that all this needs to be under complete self-regulation. So the person who's doing this, we teach our providers, that's why we have a specific training in this, to help people do these exercises in an absolutely self-regulated way. So they are in command. You could say they learn to let themselves go a little bit out of control in a controlled way, so that nothing of this becomes overwhelming, because the trauma itself was overwhelming. That's why you use the defensive mechanisms. You don't want to treat the result of trauma, the tension patterns, by being overwhelming again. So you want to have these biological mechanism in your hand available, so you let it happen, but only as long as it feels comfortable, you feel safe, and you even may like it. Many people say, wow, this is a real pleasurable experience. We have very touching results with this when we applied this, for example, with young adolescents who had been under severe trauma, and they say, wow, this is the first time I feel my body in a pleasurable way again.
Da, mogli bismo to opisati kao neku vrst automasaže, kada bi se htjeli igrati s riječima.
Some people call it like this. They say it feels like a massage from the inside instead being massage
sa nekom
from the
vlastitom
outside.
svojom logikom. TRE se naravno može koristiti u, kako bi se reklo, neopasnim situacijama, s obzirom da uvijek postoje neke dnevne, tjedne, mjesečne, višegodišnje ili pak životne traume koje su negdje ostale zabilježenja u tijelu. No, David Berceli drži dosta predavanja upravo vojnicima, vatrogascima, policajcima i slično. Drugim riječima, ljudima koji se nađu, kao što ste i prije spominjali, u traumatičnim situacijama, to mogu biti poplave, potresi, kada velik broj ljudi zapravo se nalazi u tome. TRE je nekakva vrst samopomoći u tom smislu. Namijenjena je tome da čovjek može u konkretnoj situaciji, kada je gusto, da tako kažemo, si na neki način pomoći. U takvim situacijama, koliko čovjek mora već biti uvježban za TRE, ili koliko može, poznavajući principe, si sam pomoći? Drugim riječima, u okruženjima koja su traumatična i zbivaju se upravo u tom trenutku. Na koji način se TRE može primijeniti, a to je jedna od njegovih ideja također i bila, da se netom poslije čovjek nekako vrati sebi umjesto da proguta to i nosi sa sobom.
Yes, you can. And that's a big advantage of this. I mean, you can. You would need someone to teach you the exercises in a safe way so that you can use them in a safe way, and then you can help yourself with it. I don't say that the exercises will resolve all the trauma necessarily. We have examples where doing the exercise resolved tremendous post-traumatic symptoms. Almost some kind of, we said, oh my God, it's that effective, and we want to understand it more. But also we have to see if, for example, there is a strong relational trauma, psycho-emotional trauma connected to it. It can be a very good complementary tool to a trauma therapy. So it doesn't replace trauma therapy necessarily. But again, it can be a very good combination. Talking about shock trauma, it is, you can use it, you don't need to have any previous training or something like this. You can simply learn it in 1.5 hours, let's say. And then you need probably some company in the group to see that you can practice it safely alone, and it can be very helpful. You talked about the prevention effect, and this is something we also, our teachers sometimes are invited to do this, for example, for firemen or policemen, soldiers, not only when they have been traumatized, but to restore this mechanism in their bodies so they feel comfortable with it, so that in situations when they're exposed to strong stress, that the organism has easier access to this relieving mechanism. And so it can become a resilient factor, as we say, for them to handle stressful situations better and don't get into post-traumatic symptoms. Just to give you an example, the Austrian army, which was kind of amazing to us, we already trained 30 or 40 people inside the Austrian army, and as far as I know, they want to even integrate it in their basic training for young soldiers, and they were going to do research on it because they found it so helpful. We have a lot of people in different armies. We have the biggest research project now going on, which was a surprise for us. We're very grateful for this, that the US government gave us a $500,000 research fund to research to make a research on the benefit of involuntary movements for post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans in a veteran hospital using I.T.R.E.
Kad smo već kod toga, u kojoj mjeri je ta metoda, osim što je uočena i na jedan način zdravorazumski povezana, zbog toga jer ovdje pričamo o onom starom opažajnoj tehnici vidiš pa primijeniš, kada pričamo o malo dubljim istraživanjima, u kojoj mjeri se i na koji način pristupilo u znanstvenim istraživanjima upravo ovom specifičnom jednom metodi koja u stvari bi trebala biti na neki način uključena u svakodnevni život? Je li bilo kakvih istraživanja koja su pokušala egzaktno dobiti podatke o dobrobiti određenih dijelova tijela ili stanja ili slično? Evo, spominjite da programi tek počinju.
Yes, programs are starting, thanks God, because we are very interested. So far, most of this was research on the basis of phenomena we saw from people practicing it, reports we got, and there was some little research on it. I give you an example in the SOS children homes. I think you have this in Croatia too. We had colleagues in South Africa working with this organization, so they did it with 120 children in this environment, and they had an accompanying research project, but this was a kind of a simple one, just not very specific, looking what could be the results of this, what is different afterwards, how they feel different. And it was a side effect to find out, and everybody of the mothers of these homes were so grateful to this, and we didn't even expect it, that they found out that after using this, they had a considerable reduction. If I remember right, about 80% of bed peeing disappeared. Great. We would have never expected that. And now when we have some of these phenomena, now we need the funds, and the technology to research more what really this tremor mechanism, we have hypotheses about it, but really doing this is doing on a physiological level, affecting the autonomic nervous system, there are valid hypotheses, but not yet enough based, as I say, evidence-based research. This is on its way.
Da, drugim riječima nije još sve izmjereno. Ne kažem da stvari moraju biti izmjerene da bi radile. Zanimljivo je što taj vid masaže, nazovimo je automasažom, na neki način omogućuje da se u nekakvu dinamiku uključe i dijelovi koji su inače nedostupni kada bi čovjek pokušao masažom dopreti do njih. Mi zapravo možemo, koliko god da ljudi mogu zahvatiti određene organe, ipak ih ne mogu obuhvatiti, barem ne dok god smo obloženi kožama. Niko od nas ne želi skidati kožu s tijela, bar dok je živ, bar pretpostavljam. Dakle, koji su to mišići koje u stvari ne možemo zahvatiti masažama, a koje zapravo također imaju značajan učinak?
Well, there's one muscle system which is of utmost importance, and this is iliopsoas muscle system, and just broadly speaking, I will stand up again. It's a muscle which connects about on all of the lumbar vertebrae in front of your spine. It goes all the way down. It's deep inside in the body, goes all the way down and connects to the inside of your thighs. So that's the muscle you use. When I did this before, that's the main muscle doing this, but I cannot say, if I say to you, use your psoas, you will hopefully look at me and say what you're talking about. You cannot even use it consciously. And when I say to you, relax your psoas, you will look at me the same, because you cannot. But it comes with this automatized, excuse me, my English is not so good, reaction from your alarm system, from the brainstem, is activated, and then, unfortunately, it can stay contracted. So we want to release it. Now, you can touch the psoas if you have learned deep massage at certain points of the body, but it's a very invasive and painful technique. So you can have trigger points on the psoas, and people who had strong tension there found it helpful. But again, do you want necessarily to use an invasive technique when, for example, people have been traumatized by invasion? Do you want to treat it by invasion? So I think it's a much more elegant way, and through these exercises where we provoke the tremors, we actually provoke them by the adductor muscles, and then they have the chance to travel along muscle chains and fascia connections through the body. And we found that this is a good way, for example, to release and relax the psoas muscle. That's why a very good outcome of this is very often people get rid of lower back pain, because lower back pain usually is the consequence where the contracted psoas muscle in the front, all these muscles, not only the psoas, but psoas is a big part in this, where you go into this protective contraction and you don't want to stay there, and you use your back to straighten yourself up, and you get all the pressure in the lower back. And for example, firemen, soldiers, policemen, all these stress professions, usually they have lower back pain. And not speaking about usual population, And physiotherapists know that this is the case, that the tension is here. But they don't know so much that how much the psoas muscle is related to deep fear, shock, and trauma, and that especially if it's related to these kind of situations, it stays there because it cannot have a completion, a release. So this is what is one of the most important muscle groups we're working with.
U svakom slučaju, s obzirom da je suvremeni život i svijet na neki način i tvornica traumi, očigledno je da se ovakve vježbe zapravo mogu primjenjivati ne samo na u ekstremnim slučajevima ratova, vojski, traumi, vidjeli smo, spominjali ste i djecu i slično. Tako da, hvala na gostovanju. Hvala na tumačenju i nadam se da će se tehnika proširiti i da se ljudi mogu sami pomagati kada se nađu u tim situacijama za koje zapravo svi znamo da ne znamo zapravo kako bismo ih riješili, pa onda, postoji puno načina za rješavanje toga koji nisu baš svi preporučljivi. U samom slučaju, do nekog vašeg sljedećeg dolaska u Hrvatsku, hvala i doviđenja.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Hvala i vama na pažnji. I TRE, a i druge bioenergetske terapije potvrđuju da zapravo živimo u svijetu u kojem vlada povratna sprega i u kojem se sve nastoji uravnotežiti. I naravno isto vrijedi za naše sustave u kojima se dobivaju posve drugačije formule ako se počnu psiha, emocije i tijelo gledati kao jedna neodvojiva cjelina. Djelujući na jedno, naravno djeluju se na drugo. Traume su to oduvijek znale i koristile, sad isti proces dostupan iz druge strane. Dovoljno razloga za poželjeti laku noć.